Hi YouTube, this is Kissblade, coming with another video. Have some downtime on my side, and I think for this video we'll do something a little bit different than some of the previous gameplay videos, because this video is about the upcoming changes that are currently on the testing branch and will be eventually pushed live, and some things to consider with this test branch. Now, this is more of a my thoughts on the balance changes in the changelog, as well as maybe a few gameplay changes here and there, and can take that feedback to incorporate and maybe practice for the upcoming patch. What are some builds you might try to do, and so forth. So let's get started. So in terms of how to go to the test branch, if you are on Steam, you can essentially handle by swapping through this, going through this instructions, and that will get you to the test branch where you will see the specific, where you actually have the specific changes incorporated into your gameplay. Now, that being said, the current test branch I noticed is slightly unstable. I've been getting a lot more error messages and crashes when I am on the test branch, including when I'm watching even a replay from the test branch. So if you get a message here and there, or an error message, just yeah, that's just normal on the in terms of the test this turn iteration of the test branch. So first things first, in terms of new gravity well changes, I haven't seen any of these specific gravity wells, but I am really hoping they are specifically limited to the certain maps only, and not on the random maps that folks usually tend to play with. For example, random fives, random threes, and so forth, because these changes can be very imbalanced if it occurs. Like, for example, imagine if you decide you are going for a carrier build, because carriers are slightly adjusted now to be a bit more buffed so that strike crafts aren't completely unfeasible. Well, and then you go to your opponent's homeworld and they get this and have Plasma Storm on it. Well, then it's totally pointless because you are going to be in trouble. Or not just well, rather this can't pop up in a homeworld, but let's say it pops up at a gravity well type. Then, well, then that's done. Your entire gameplay is shot. Haven't seen these new star types either. Curious about what they are. Advent Titan Foundry structure. This is more of just something to note if you are going for Titans as Advent, especially as the Erotica. As a heads up, the Erotica on test appears to be bugged with its level 6 in that it just doesn't proc at all randomly at times. So something to consider if you are doing the Erotica rush is that the level 6 may not necessarily be reliable or even working. But it is an adjustment you'll have to make. You'll have to remember to build the Titan Foundry, maybe save some orbitals for it, or maybe you'll have to deconstruct certain uh, orbital slots so you can start a Titan Foundry. In addition, because now you have a Titan Foundry structure, there's more risk because if your opponent sees you with a Titan Foundry structure and it building a Titan out of it, they could focus down your Titan Foundry, or they could just simply park their maybe anti-Titan fleet around it. So just an slightly extra bit of risk, but overall, I don't think it's going to be a huge deal. Advent Titans outside, well, the Coronado is really not that great, and the Erotica, it is worth rushing, but I guess the main change is just you're going to have to be a little bit more mindful of how far in the front lines you choose to build it. The Domina got a pretty hefty buff from the looks of this. This is pretty huge. The extra suppression range, which is the disable, is pretty nice if the autocast is indeed working properly, because where it says cast range has been improved to help casting consistency on autocast, when I tried to build a Domina, it wasn't working at all. So now with this change, the Domina may be worth utilizing as a potential counter to a heavy cruiser spam. That being said, I still wouldn't quite build it for that purpose, but the nullify being from 30 to 50 antimatter is pretty interesting. In fact, you may even consider, just if you're building Dominus, turn off all the suppression casts of auto and just specifically use nullify to spam on your opponent's capitals, and really kind of cut some of the more dangerous ones underneath behind them. And it also works on Titans, which is pretty neat. Okay, so uh, definitely worth considering. But that being said, why would I not build this? Is because of this next change up here, which is the Illuminator change. Build time down to 29 seconds from 34, and also a cost decrease as well as stats buffs. This I think is a little bit too much for the Illuminator. In the current patch on live right now, Illuminators I don't think are a great ship, but they are a ship that you would build at times in the right circumstances. For example, if you need a ship that is great at just kind of clearing some lighter ships or dealing with adding some extra long range DPS to capitals, Illuminators are worth considering on current live. They do good damage against capitals, and they handle light ships pretty darn well in terms of just clearing them out in a quick amount of time. Let's say Tempests, other Illuminators, and say stuff like Caleb's and what may have you. Granted, a lot of these ships you could probably answer with other stuff, and that's part of the reason why I don't really build Illuminators that often on live. But they have a use. But this buff now, I would build Illuminators all the time on test with these changes. I do think this is maybe a little bit too overtuned. I have done some testing builds with Illuminators, and they in terms of the ability to spam them, I wouldn't say it's that noticeably different. But the fact that like now they also have extra combat buffs as well on top of that, there's no question I would be building them all the time now. May even be worth having a dedicated build just to rush to Illuminators. But Advent is you're gonna have to have a trip. I've only been playing Advent aggro, so I haven't obviously had the luxury to rush straight to Illuminators as Advent aggro. But as Advent support, I would definitely rush it. But as Advent aggro, I've been building actually Disciples mixed with Tempests, and then transitioning to Illuminators. And I'll talk about Disciples and why that's the case. Call to Ask, pretty big nerf onto the stun, and this is much needed. It was just absolutely ridiculous. Their 5v5 late game in terms of on live in the more competitive MP games have been just entirely about playing around your team's Culturask against your enemy's team's Culturask in endgame fights. So this is a much needed nerf. So it's here. We'll see how it plays out. I don't think it's as if this was the intent, then I don't think this was as much of a say over nerf as it's a pretty significant nerf. But I think the Culturask is at least now has a role as just an AoE disable rather than just a I win card. In terms of the raid range changes, there are now these items that you could build to increase your minor faction range changes. I don't really use raids all that much as minor factions. I tend to like the econ stuff instead. For example, the exotics that you could get off Pirate Wager and Luxians. But one thing that was noticeable about this specific change that you absolutely need to be aware of is that it affects the Fabricator Cruiser cooldown that you can get. So now the Fabricator Cruiser cooldown actually has a range as well, which I don't know if it was intended or not. It certainly was an incredibly strong cooldown, but it is something worth taking into account. And maybe you would not necessarily go for it now because of the range nerf limitations on it. Similarly, now Pronost raid is also part affected by this, and Pronost was already something that I think it had some potential, but the range limitation for sure was just such a huge bottleneck that I didn't think it was. After experimenting with it, it was just so inconsistent, so I stopped bothering to go for it, and now it is probably completely pointless to ever level it at all. XP changes. This is neat that they actually finally made the Javelies worth killing. So that's cool because previously there were 30 XP, so I was just always stealing Javelies above everything else because the Harkas were giving 100 XP if you killed them, and the Javelies were only giving 30 from neutral. So whenever I was opening Rapture, I'd obviously rather get 100 XP And yeah, the Harga is a little bit bulkier and so forth, but Javelins were quite good last patch anyway, and they were giving no XPs anyway for killing them. What's also something worth noting is that now the Siege, the Advent Purge Vessel, and the where the heck is it? The where is the pirate ship? The pirate rogue, Pillager. There we go. That's what I was looking for. These are now also giving a quite a good chunk of change in terms of XP, so that's pretty good as far as handling going up against them. So definitely something worth minding. And the planetary bomber by the Vasari is going up to a whopping 90, so that's pretty huge. And then on top of that, I didn't even know the Vigilus was giving 90 XP now down to 60. I don't think it's going to be a huge. Some of these may not be a huge difference because of the fact that you weren't building any of them anyway. But overall, from what it looks like, pretty neat change. But I don't know if it would make a huge impact in gameplay, except now you can punish your opponent a bit more for going rating style with planetary bombers. There's a lot more answers for that now. In terms, and what I mean by rating style with planetary bombers is just constantly building planetary bombers and splitting them off to your opponent's various planets. There's a lot of different answers now for that. Life Frigates, as we'll see, it got a huge buff, in my opinion, for handling planetary bombers, and you're going to be able to XP farm them. So, nice change on in terms of buffing the XP you get for planetaries there on top of that. Strikecraft changes definitely needed because Strikecrafts were completely useless last patch. And yeah, I'm glad they actually admitted it was excessive nerf. I don't know what the heck they were thinking. But now they're, I would say the Advent Strikecraft, the fact that it's just pure hull, I don't know if I would build Advent Strikecraft. Something to also note on test at least, the fighter attack patterns are currently bugged, so fighters are the Advent at least the Advent fighters are completely worthless. I would not use them at all. You may want to you basically, if you plan on using Strikecraft, convert them all into bombers. Are they going to be worth building? I would say hard to say. I personally don't think so still. I don't think this is impressive enough in terms of just these changes. And the build time, yeah, it's going to help maybe Advent's early game. That's all I see. Because your capital ships have bombers that can actually survive the neutral Gardas. But overall, I don't think I would build Strikecraft and carriers in with just these changes. But we'll have to really see how the attack pattern really makes as a meaningful difference. I think some experimentation can be attempted with drone hosts again, but this just feels too flimsy, especially at 40 seconds and with the damage they do, and the fact that Exorius are just so good right now that I just don't see the point. So, Pirate Base, the Pillagers have now been reduced in terms of how their spawn, which is really neat because of the fact that, well, they were definitely the most annoying things to deal with when it came to dealing with pirates. In 5 lately, there has been more calls about banning pirates, banning influence raids, all that stuff. I don't think they were actually needed. I think that, yes, they required more skill to handle, but I don't think they were ever. I've never felt that they were overpowered. I felt that the only thing that may have been a little too safe was that if there was a support pirate player who can just be given a lot of free time because their aggro maybe just is able to bunker down, do 1v2 for like about 40-45 minutes. The fleet supply you can bloat to with pirates can, by 40 minutes, is really huge, and you can make a very big strong push with it that might be a little bit too hard to deal with for certain factions. But even then, as I said, you're letting an aggro player 1v2 for 40 something minutes while you get to handle all this. You could have been Titan rushing and so forth, and arguably had a similar impact. So pirate chain nerfed altogether. I don't think they were necessarily needed, but this is making pirates a lot less annoying to deal with. So I think it's okay. Not a bad change. Speed between gravity wells, speed between stars have been increased. This feels so good because now just you are waiting less for your ships to get around from one system to another. And at Advent, this feels really good because Advent, one of the weaknesses of Advent is the fact that you don't get phase jump reduction, unlike the other two factions as a tech. So with this change now, you're actually going to be your fleets actually feel quite speedy. And I would say even despite the nerf that we're going to see in terms of overall speed for purge vessels, I think purge vessels should play a part in your gameplay as Advent now, because of the fact that now you can finally move them from system to system and start harassing planets a lot more effectively with them. Rebalanced homeworld starting levels. Tech got a huge buff compared to other factions, but Advent got a pretty decent one. About 2 extra mining for free, so they could get started much quicker. But you could look, the tech one is pretty darn big. 2 extra commerce, 1 extra mining compared. So Tech got the biggest buff out of this, but yeah, Advent got also a pretty good one. And this is probably where I would say like Visari feels almost maybe over nerfed. But that being said, I still see Vasari playing very competitively currently in the test version, which is a pretty big indictment about how overtuned Vasari is currently on live, I would say. The fact that the other factions are getting some of these real, this is a pretty huge buff, because I'm not certain if every player has read Zabik's really great guides on planetary development, how it works, but each planetary development that you are increasing will get it extra will get more and more expensive for every planetary development you paid for. But if you have free planetary development, such as the starting ones, then they're not they're going to be as if you didn't have it. They're going to cost the same as your very first planetary development, very second planetary development, so on and so forth. So your start has a gigantic cost savings on top of the fact that you're already also then ramping from this econ boost right off the bat. You're maxing out your plans a lot very quickly. So your starting resources are more, and you have a faster trickle right off the bat. This is a pretty huge buff for the other two factions, and since Visari's not getting one, then it basically equates to a pretty huge nerf for Visari eco-wise. So this change alone, the fact that it pushed through, and as I said, Vasari still seem quite capable of in terms of handling. It seems that they are still perfectly fine in the test branch. It's a pretty huge indictment for how overtuned Vasaris are. All right, and now here's the other big change. This was probably the biggest, one of the biggest changes. Here's the other huge one, which is adjustments of speed for ships, and almost all of them across the board gained a speed increase. But some are, I would say, you want to be mindful. If they gain a lower speed increase than others, of course, then that means they are quote unquote technically slower. And then one thing to really call out, all the planetary bombers are actually got a speed nerf, while everything else got a speed buff. So that means planetary bombers are actually much easier to catch than all the other equivalent ships. For example, Purge vessels 750 to 700, Pillager 750 to 650. Cross Evolve did not get changed, but as I said, if everything else got buffed, then this is technically got slower in comparison. And the Destructor got a very small adjustment, 570 to 600. Once again, very minor compared to some of the other ships in terms of their speed buffs. And what's really worth calling out as an Advent player is the Disciple went from 900 to 110. This, you can really feel this. Disciples are so speedy now. And also Iconis 550 to 800, great. They're able to actually now keep track of their entire fleet. Illumina 650 to 800, also really, really, like, these that buff just, your Illuminas feel so good right now. I would argue that just from looking at it right now, currently, they feel a little overtuned. But we'll see. But Disciples are definitely worth building now, especially because they're the same upgrade line as Illuminators, and because they're so speedy, they they handle very well. You can micro them by just kind of driving any disciples that are being focused fired in the beginning. In the when you're colonizing, just drive them through. Then neutral any disciples that are being focus fire, so you can kite and spread the damage easily. You can as I said, micro them to let's say avoid either juggle them in terms of the damage spread, chase practically anything they need to chase because disciples can fire on the move. So I really would urge for folks who have looked at and been primarily obviously building Tempest disciples with, in my opinion, kind of pointless to build before. Really consider building disciples now, as my current tier 1 military when I'm aggro has just been a mix of disciple and Tempest, and that's only because I couldn't afford pure disciples because I don't quite have yet a build order for pure disciples that supports it in terms of pure disciples into something like, for example, pure disciples transitioning to guardians, transitioning into illuminators. I think should be the play, but it is very credit heavy. So you're not tech. So Advent isn't great at producing credits. Good, much better, of course, producing metal crystal. So as a result, Tempest still like fill out the bulk of my tier 1 fleet, but I definitely build disciples now as part of my fleet as well. And then on top of that, because of the fact that now credits are playing more of a has more of a role in the Tempest military requirements from their econ, then that means TIE Sanctum, which I used to skip, is now something I also built. Haven Dome, which I built, but now I will probably raise higher in a priority because all of these things are credit income stuff that you want to weave into your build order because of the fact that disciples are good now and illuminators are good now. So yeah, you need credits to support both. I'm actually also building a lot fewer cap ships because of that, because of the fact that credit sinks, if you have a huge credit sink, then cap ships are kind of hard to weave in effectively. Plus, also, disciples and illuminators, neither of them are really good at protecting your cap ships. They're good at killing stuff. So you're not building, like, for example, some Vigiluses anymore to say screen for your cap ships with Guardians and Destrots and so forth, where you have like kind of more of a tankier front line where you need a cap ships to output damage. Now Illuminators will do the job for you. So yeah, really nice speed changes across the board. Also, another thing to consider is now because Seekers are so fast now, you may even want to build like 1 or 2 Seekers in the very beginning, as like just in the beginning of your queue. Early on, just to get those extra scouts that really uncover and zoom around the map. So I think when as people's micros get better, definitely in a more traditional opening might be something like a 2 Seeker opening, because then you can just kind of park some Seekers in certain grav walls while the other ones look around. You park certain Seekers in certain grav walls just to get some intel of like, oh, if my enemy jumps to this choke, I want to have something as a heads up. Alright. So fixed AI scuttling issue, only factory issues to make room for others. These things not really this one not really a big deal for me. But change weapon and ability to no longer update while the unit is in phase space. Once again, this is actually a bit of a Advent buff because of the fact that because Advent doesn't get phase jump reduction. So your Advent's less likely to kind of like abuse this mechanic because it takes so long for them to go to kind of get into the phase jump prep stage of the Gravwell, that they could never really take advantage of this anyway compared to TEC and Vasari, especially Vasari. So this is a nice change as well. Fix the exploiter selling and re-equipping items to reduce their cooldowns by track. This is just needed because there were some really crazy exploitations you could do with this. The pirate base being one of them, looting crew being another one, where you basically, especially if you're down to like 1 charge of the looting crew, you essentially can get a double steal because you could do looting crew, you lose the last charge, buy another looting crew, immediately steal again. And in fact, I often even did just if I were down to, if I had, say, I had 3 charges of looting crew, I used one before, and now I have 2. After I use my second charge, I'm down to 1, and I just throw away the looting crew, immediately buy a new one just for that double proc, because it can be such a huge game swing in terms of, especially for early combat. Imagine you take 2 Harkas or 3 Harkas in the first engagement, that's a 72 supply swing of something like probably like a 600 supply fight, 700 supply fight. That's one tenth of that's actually a one tenth of the supply, right? If it's a 72 supply swing, because it's 30. Actually, it's even more than 72. I think Harka's a 14 supply each, so it'll be 84 because it's 42 increased supply for you and 42 decreased supply for your opponent. So an 84 supply swing is pretty ridiculous. Art being updated. This is nice, but what I noticed is that it wasn't updated like consistently because, for example, the tithe picture has been graphic has been updated, but if you look at what you build in the planet, it's the old tithe artwork. So it can get very confusing. Same thing for shields. They I just when you got used to like the I thought shield. In fact, shield art upgrades were probably the one of the better ones because it looked consistent, so you knew what you were upgrading the whole time. Now it's I don't know what was the what is some of the this way the art looks for, but hey, it's it's there. Other stuff, the UI stuff, I mean, of course, all bug fixes are nice and so forth. So I'm not gonna comment too much anything about any of these. But yeah, overall, I think this is a good patch. I've been very excited about playing on the test branch, even though and because to be honest, I was taking a break and I was ready to quit if this patch looked as bad as I thought the last patch was. I thought the last patch was absolutely terrible, and but this has gotten me a lot more excited about the game. So overall, in my opinion, a good, very good, exciting patch. So give it a shot if you are able to swap to the test branch. Try out some builds, especially if you're Advent. I feel Advent got a pretty nice buff though. Now that I'm looking at the Tech Econ buff, it's arguable Tech may have even gotten the largest buff. So not sure how much of that is warranted necessarily. I'm also seeing that because of these changes, it does seem that Titan rushing has been a bit more of a thing. Also, looting crew. That's another thing that was not mentioned here. Looting crew has been removed as a an odd item you could buy, and that is again, in my opinion, a Vasari nerf. And because Vasari probably could have taken the most advantage out of looting crew. Their egg does a whopping ton of damage with looting crew because it has AOE right out of the bat, right out of the gates. So on top of that, it's the fact that because you no longer now have this limitless credit income from looting crew, it does mean you have to be a little bit more careful with your economy and the fact that tech actually starts off with the best trick initial early econ. I think it's going to actually shake things up a little bit. Advent, I originally thought maybe got the biggest buff on this patch because yeah, the Illuminators. But now that I'm thinking more about it, it might be that Tech is probably got the biggest buff out of this patch just from this one change alone. I cannot stress how impactful this change was. So if you're a Tech player, you really would. I think you would really enjoy this test branch patch. I feel they it probably smooths over a lot of issues with TEC because TEC's main problem has been the early game, and this changed everything. So yeah, that's it. Have a good one, and look forward to seeing you guys in the next video.